Chapter 4, Act 4, The Knight's Tale. Act 4, The Knight's Tale, The Homecoming. The next morning had blossomed into another beautiful, promising summer day. Porum loitered a lot longer than she should have in the garden, savoring the peaceful tranquility of my city, a village that only came before most of its inhabitants roused from their slumbers. Once everyone was up for the day, the village transformed into a buzzing hub of commerce and magic that did not cease until long after night fell. As she debated over which melon to harvest for that morning's breakfast, she gave a gentle knock to the last large melon in the patch with her fist, and heard the hollow thud she was looking for. She slid open the small knife she kept on her belt and began sawing away at the vine, humming along with the rhythm of her blade. When she severed the vine, she lifted up the cumbersome melon in both arms and began to waddle back to the Tower of Prayer, glancing down the hill toward the small building the Devil's Road was housed in. Porum felt her spirits droop considerably just at the sight of it, and turned away. Everything bad that had happened yesterday raced back into her mind, the ominous second moon, the flock of monsters that had flown over Mycedia, the frightening crash she had heard from the uppermost spire of the Tower of Prayer that turned out to be Theodore's comrades. Porum. I hope whatever you are doing in Troya, that you are safe. I pray you have the sense to come back home to us if something happens. Theodore and the hooded man were waiting in the great hall of the tower when Porum came back inside. Good morning, Porum exclaimed, forcing her dark thoughts to the back of her mind in an effort to be as cheerful as possible for her guests. Theodore's companion seemed all right, but she noticed Theodore looked as if he hadn't gotten any sleep at all. Dark circles were prominent under his eyes, and his hair was tangled and dull, even though it was wet from what had probably been a hurried splash under a bucket of water. The hooded man silently offered to take the melon from Porum's hands by his extending his arms outward, and she let him, brushing the dirt from her hands off onto her clothes. She caught Theodore ogling it hungrily with eyes as wide as saucers, and smiled. Go on, have some. There's plenty for everyone. She handed Theodore her knife, and he carved out a slab while the man held it steady against his knee, managing to keep his balance as elegantly as a dancer, Porum noticed jealously. She slipped past them to the foot of the stairs leading to the crystal chamber, calling out into the threshold. Hey, you guys. Could you come down here, please? The sound of thundering footsteps running hurriedly down the stairs could be heard, and moments later, a black mage and a white mage appeared, both eyeing Theodore and his companion suspiciously before turning to Porum. You called, Lady Porum? The white mage asked in a high, squeaky voice that some boy long ago had probably told her was cute, so she never grew out of the habit of raising the inflection unnaturally. Her deep maroon hair was meticulously curled around her face in a long bob that framed her chin in the front and gradually shortened to only a few inches in the back. Her pink and white robes were perfectly pressed and looked as new as the day they were taken out of their garment box from her first day of classes. Her upturned green eyes were swathed with pink eyeliner, giving the illusion of striking wings, framing her gaze as she blinked. The black mage that accompanied her appeared to be her exact opposite in every way. Deeply tanned despite the massive straw hat she wore upon her head, her long, tangled black hair was tossed back into a sloppy ponytail, and it was debatable when a brush had last been run through it, let alone the last time it was washed or styled. Her blue robes were covered in scorch marks and haphazardly patched from other magical accidents, and a cheerful yellow scarf was wrapped around the bottom half of her face, only revealing the top of a slender nose and narrowed black eyes. Who are these people? The black mage asked, mid-yawn. Porum forced herself to smile harder. One of her biggest pet peeves was a lack of manners, thanks to growing up with a twin like Porum. These are the people I told you about last night that need access to the Devil's Road. Theodore. These two mages will guide you through the Devil's Road in my place. The white mage here, Megan, knows how to open the seal. The black mage, Anja, will be able to annihilate any monsters that dare make their approach. Thank you very much. Theodore bowed to the two mages, hastily wiping the melon juice from his mouth. I appreciate you helping us on such short notice. Beats hanging around here, waiting for something to do, Anja shrugged, and Porum cleared her throat so loudly that the two mages jumped in place. Megan peered up at Theodore, a slow grin forming. I can sense great white magic potential in your body. Yes, an immense power greater than all others. Who did you say you were again? I didn't. Theodore blushed. I'm Theodore, of the Red Wings of Baron. Baron, Megan shrugged. That's a shame. If you studied here under Lady Porum, I bet you could be a master. Theodore shook his head. I don't know. he looked to Porum helplessly, and she gently tugged Megan back by her collar.
Now, let's not get distracted. Theodore is in a hurry to get back to Baron.
Porum gave him one last hug, and whispered in his ear so that only he could hear her. Her gut had told her, thanks to the look on the man's face last night when Theodore had revealed the fate of the Red Wings, that perhaps Theodore was not being as open with his identity as she had previously assumed. She had also noticed that this was the second time Theodore had only introduced himself as a Red Wing, and not as Prince Theodore Harvey.
Be careful, Theodore. Please give my regards to Cecil and the others when you arrive home.
Theodore hugged her back, and nodded his thanks. The hooded man handed the melon back to Porum with the knife sticking out of the top, and she anxiously looked over the group one last time.
May the blessings of the crystals accompany you on your journey.
They departed the Tower of Prayer, and Theodore glanced over his shoulder at Porum one last time as the doors began to slam shut behind them. She raised her hand in response, her mouth set in a straight line. Theodore only turned back around when she had completely disappeared behind the threshold. It had been more exciting than he had anticipated, becoming reacquainted with one of his father's friends from the war. Especially after everything that had happened yesterday, a familiar face had been a boon to his spirits. Based on Lady Porum's age, she would have had to have been a young child when she first met Cecil. Theodore wondered what kind of friendship they had had, and wished he could have asked her more questions about what Cecil had been like as a young man. In the back of his mind, a dark, torturous whisper echoed. It may be too late to ask him myself.
The Devil's Road is right over here,
Anja said, interrupting Theodore's thoughts as she tied her straw hat tighter underneath her chin.
It's already a hot one today.
They reached a nondescript building at the bottom of the hill. The Tower of Prayer sat upon that looked as if it were a normal village dwelling. There were even windows in the front with tightly drawn shades. Megan whirled around, gesturing for the others to move away with fluttering palms.
I will now release the seal. Stand back, please.
Everyone took a dutiful step backwards, and satisfied, Megan turned toward the house, closing her eyes and raising her arms in the air. There was a soft humming noise, and Theodore noticed that the windows in the house had begun to rattle in their panes. Just when the noise had gotten louder and he preemptively covered his eyes to protect them from what he sure was going to be a storm of shattering glass, a wave of green light burst from the center of the building, sending warm, tingling shock waves through the four of them before ricocheting away and dissipating in the dawn's light. Theodore lowered his arms, and Megan took hold of the latch, the door swinging open.
Let us continue inside.
They shuffled inside, and Theodore realized that there was only one room in the entire building, the entryway they were standing in. Anja closed the door behind them, plunging them into darkness with the shades blocking any early morning sunlight that could have trickled in. On the floor in the rear of the room was a glowing blue rune, which began to shine brighter as Megan approached it. She looked up at Theodore and the hooded man, her eyes glowing with the haunting light of the rune reflected within.
Please allow me to explain a little more about the Devil's Road. This was once built as a means of transportation that only those who were casters of magic could safely traverse. It takes enormous stamina and spiritual energy to cross dimensions. You could think of it as a teleport spell, multiplied by 100. Those who are gifted in magic are more likely to have an abundance of those qualities, thus they were able to cross safely. You said casters of magic could only traverse it. What changed?
Theodore asked quietly.
Humans did,
Anja interjected, pushing past Theodore and the hooded man to stand next to Megan.
The gift of magic has been slowly spreading throughout the planet ever since it first appeared in human history. It's why you have phenomena such as our own Lord Porum and Lady Porum, two of the most powerful mages in the world born to a family with no previous magical history whatsoever. Someday, it will be a matter of when, not if, every human on the planet can control some level of magic. We're evolving as a species, slowly, but surely. Evolution.
Theodore whispered under his breath. There's that word again. Long ago, our ancestors, the Lunarians, came to the blue planet on a moon. There, they sleep, waiting for the right time to join us forever. When that happens, there will cease to be Lunarians and humans. We will all become one people, and evolve together.
You would not be here if Lady Porum did not think you could handle the journey,
Megan offered, mistaking Theodore's silence for worry.
We've learned that even those with no penchant for magic can cross safely as long as they focus the whole of their heart and soul on their desired destination. After all, that's basically what magic is, envisioning something and making it come to life. But with that said,
Anja waggled her finger.
It's important that you only concentrate on getting to the other side, to Baron. Understood? If your heart is clouded with any doubt about what you are doing, you could be lost forever between dimensions. Oh Anja, they'll be fine.
Megan shook her head, and even gave a gay little laugh.
Let's get this show on the road. We'll hold hands and go at the same time, okay?
Anja grunted and took Megan's hand, but she didn't look happy about it. Theodore and the hooded man stepped closer, linking hands with each other and with Anja and Megan, respectively.
On the count of 3, all right.
Megan chirped, and Theodore closed his eyes. He could feel the hooded man tugging him forward as Megan counted down. A few seconds later, the floor fell out from under his feet, and he could feel a fierce tempest swallow him whole. Think of Baron. Think of Baron. As the wind shrieked in his ears, Theodore tried to picture his homeland and resisted the temptation to open his eyes and risk distraction. He mentally traced the path he would take to school every day from the castle, which had always been straightforward and free of diversions except for Fridays. Those afternoons were when he would stop by his grandmother's house after class and give her the rundown of his week while enjoying a plateful of her specialty, Baronian butter cookies. Sometimes she would tell him stories about Rosa when she was growing up, and what life had been like when his mother had just been a civilian before Cecil had asked her to marry him. If she were feeling really nostalgic a particular day, she would tell him about his grandfather, a noble dragoon who had died before Rosa had been born. Those stories had been few and far between, but were always worth the wait. She had even told Theodore stories that she said she could never bring herself to share with Rosa as a child.
There is no doubt that you are the spitting image of your father,
Joanna Farrell would bemoan, and Theodore suspected she only said it half-jokingly.
But I can see Rosa's father in you as clear as if he were standing before me all those years ago. You carry yourself with the same grace and lightness in your step he did. You would have made a fine dragoon, my dear. If only Cain were still here to train you.
Theodore's memories transported him back to the castle he had grown up in, where he would follow Rosa around as a child while she taught white magic classes, and sneak into the kitchen with Sid to get extra snacks before dinner. Sometimes in the mornings before school, he would go outside and spy on his father as he drilled the Red Wings, hiding on the same walkway over the shipyard that Rosa told him she would watch Cecil and Cain duel from. But even as Theodore got older, the one place in the castle he always returned to, over and over again, was the northernmost overlook that gave the best view of the entirety of the kingdom. As a child, he wasn't allowed up there without either his parents or a guard, but when he had finally become old enough to be trusted by himself, he would steal away for hours at a time to do his schoolwork, or to watch the ships of the Red Wings depart for their missions. He remembered one evening not too long ago, when Rosa had caught him staring wistfully at the glowing village lights below, where he had just seen a group of Red Wing soldiers disembark from their ship for a night of celebratory activities in town. She had paused mid-approach, watching him quietly until he finally turned and let out a yelp in surprise.
Mother. How long have you been standing there? Not long,
a serene smile followed.
For a second, I thought I had stepped back in time. You looked just like your father when he was your age, with the way the moonlight was hitting your hair.
Theodore glanced back toward the village, crossing his arms over his chest. If only I hadn't been so afraid of being compared to father and had completed my military training. By the time the Red Wings recruit for new members, my name will be on the bottom of the list, I'm sure. Why am I such a coward?
But father was a lot different at 15, right?
Theodore kept his eyes on the village, pressing his lips together. There had been a note of dejection in his tone, that subtle as it was, his mother had picked up on right away. Rosa blinked, touching her fingers to the scarf that was wrapped around her neck.
Of course, dear. You're two different people, after all. You and your father grew up under very different circumstances. No matter what you might feel, all he has ever wanted is for you to be happy. I can promise you that.
Theodore could not bring himself to respond. How am I ever going to be happy if I can never rise to anyone's expectations? It would seem I can't even rise to my own. I've wasted so much time just being afraid of rejection. As Rosa watched the gloom befall her son's features, she couldn't help but feel like she had encountered yet another specter of the distant past. In Theodore's sorrow, she saw remnants of an old friend. Long loved, but also long forgotten to the annals of time, which had continued to march forward, indifferent of what had been left unsaid. Theodore inwardly flinched at the unpleasant memory, wishing he could forget the anxious look he had caused to appear in his mother's eyes. The same hollow sensation in his chest he had felt from just before the airship crash had begun to creep back, swirling in his lungs, and he could feel his fingers shaking in the hooded man's grip.
Theodore.
A voice that sounded very far away called out to him, but when he tried to reply, a choked gagging noise came instead, like someone was closing their fingers around his throat. He tried to picture himself back onto the castle overlook, but his thoughts were racing too fast for his heart to process, which was beating in a slow, labored rhythm. There was a flash of light, and Theodore saw his father standing where he should have been, back on the overlook, his back turned to Theodore as he gazed up at the twin moons. Theodore parted his lips to cry out, but the invisible fingers were pressing down harder, cutting off his air supply. Another flash of light blinded him, and then there was a curtain of searing flames. Theodore was propelled backward from the overlook, ripped away from Baron at the speed of light as a massive cloud of smoke released into the air from the castle, so dark that it absorbed even the light of the twin moons.
No!
Theodore cried, and felt first his right hand, and then his left hand, slip free. His body felt as if it were being torn apart, dragged into oblivion by the same intense gravity of the black light from his nightmare after their ship had crashed. His heart had reversed course and begun to pound so fast that he could hear the blood rush through his ears like the roar of an ocean. Just as he was about to open his eyes to see how close he was to being smashed into mere molecules, he heard someone call his name again, and felt a warm, tenacious pair of arms wrap around his waist, lifting him out of the maelstrom. The air had stopped rushing over his body, and his heart rate had slowed down to a pace where he could once again make out distinct, purposeful beats. Slowly, Theodore opened one eye, and then another, and found himself staring at a gently rising and falling blurry sea of blue. There came a low groan from beneath him, and Theodore realized he was actually on top of the hooded man, and probably crushing his lungs with his weight. Theodore pushed himself off hurriedly, collapsing onto a cold, grimy limestone floor. The hooded man sat up, wheezing and rubbing the back of his head as he looked at Theodore.
Are you okay? Why? Yes.
Theodore gasped.
What happened?
You tell me, the hooded man moaned, pushing his hair out of his eyes.
1 minute, we're flying along, and the next, I look over at you and see you turning blue and falling away from the group. I managed to grab back onto you, but...
He paused, looking around. They were completely surrounded in darkness, save for what little they could see in front of their faces, which consisted of the floor, and each other.
We lost Megan and Anja. Damn it.
Theodore buried his face in his hands.
It's my fault. I was trying to focus on Baron, but... Then I thought about the smoke I saw from the airship, and had this bizarre vision. It was my father, disappearing in a wall of flame.
The hooded man frowned, gently resting a hand on Theodore's hunched shoulders.
Hey. It's okay. No one got hurt. We'll find our way back, somehow. Nothing's impossible until we're dead in the ground, and you and I aren't at that point. Yet. But it's my fault.
Theodore wailed, shaking his head.
I couldn't clear the doubt from my heart like the mages asked us to. My family. If something has happened to them,
I'll never be able to tell them how sorry I am.
Hey.
The hooded man tugged on Theodore's shoulder, forcing him to turn his way. Theodore lowered his hands, heaving a heavy sigh as he looked up at his companion.
Why didn't you say something earlier? I didn't know what to say. I've been trying to tell myself that they're all right, but then I have nightmares that say otherwise. I've never had such realistic dreams before. Like my body is trying to warn me before I see it for myself. You must think I'm a sorry excuse for a night, hey?
The hooded man shook his head.
Quite the opposite. I think you've been trying to be too brave for someone who has been through as much as you have in the past 24 hours. Theodore. It's okay to be scared. It's even okay to make mistakes. Even the bravest, most powerful knights in the world have done both. What matters is what you do with that fear, and what you learn from those mistakes. If you were to tell me that you were just going to stay here and give up on getting home, I would have to tell you off. But I know that's not how you really feel. Right. Right. I'm not going to give up. I'm just scared. That I'm not capable of doing this on my own. Well, then it's a good thing you're not alone.
The man climbed to his feet, reaching down for Theodore's hand.
Come on. If we're going to get out of here, I'm going to need your help.
Theodore grabbed hold of his hand.
My help? Theodore. Theodore's heir? Friend.
A flighty female voice echoed across the darkness, causing them both to jump.
We're here.
Theodore cried, cupping his hands around his mouth.
Megan? Anja? Is that you? Yes.
Another voice piped up, cool and collected despite the troubling situation, which meant it had to have been Anja.
We made it to the exit. Can you tell us what you see? It's too dark.
Theodore looked around again, but nothing had changed.
We can't see a thing. You're probably stuck between dimensions.
There were a couple of minutes of silence, and Theodore glanced worriedly at the hooded man. However, he was turned away, his fingers pressed to his chin in thought.
Theodore. Are you still there? Yes. We feel like there must be an exit somewhere you can take to get back to the main road since we can hear each other. The only hitch is we don't know what it looks like. Or if you will fall yet deeper into time-space if you stray too far. Stay put while we think about how to find you, okay? Erg. Yes.
Theodore frowned, and the voices stopped once again. Theodore tugged on the hooded man's sleeve.
Did you catch all that? I did.
He nodded, and turned to Theodore.
But time is of the essence. We can't wait here forever. We're going to find our own way out. What?
Theodore blinked.
How do you propose we do that? Theodore. When I found you, you were surrounded in a brilliant light. Do you remember?
Theodore looked down at his feet. He remembered, barely. The same thing had happened to his body as when he was fighting the sandworm for the Knight's Emblem. He had felt an incredible burst of adrenaline, and had been able to use it to repel the flame beast back with a magic barrier. But once again, his newfound strength had failed him as quickly as it had come, and he had been left a dithering mess. At least the last time, he had managed to throw back a potion before completely passing out.
How is that going to help? It's simple,
the man shrugged.
You just need to light the way for us. If we fill this place with light, we may be able to find the path the mages spoke of. I can't exactly control it,
Theodore grimaced.
It's not a simple white magic spell.
The hooded man cocked his head.
Well, pray tell, what is it? I wish I knew. That was only the second time it's ever happened to me, and the first was a day prior. And what was happening when this phenomenon occurred?
Theodore frowned.
I was scared. Both times. I was terrified that I was going to lose something very important, the first time, that I wouldn't capture the Knight's Emblem and become a Red Wing. The second time, that I wouldn't be able to keep my promise to Captain Biggs and get back to Baron.
The hooded man shook his head.
Don't you see, Theodore? Something awakens inside of you when you have something you want to protect. I won't pretend to understand the exact nature of this power, but I don't think we need to in order to invoke it. You just need to think about what it is you are trying to protect, and it will come. Ask yourself, what is it that you are fighting for?
Theodore shook his head.
For my whole life, I've let the accomplishments of others enshroud me in shadow. It was because of that I pursued becoming a Red Wing. I wanted to make my own way in the world. I didn't want to be a man who was only valued because of his name or his bloodline.
He took a deep breath, returning his gaze to the hooded man.
Have you ever felt like that? Yes.
The man sighed, and crossed his arms over his chest.
I certainly can relate. But since the accident, I haven't thought about any of that stuff. I've only been able to think about how desperate I am to get home. I accepted the responsibility of defending Baron. And now I am the only one left who can see it through. My family, and my friends, as few in number as they are, they can probably rely on their own strength, and have no need of mine. But I can't rest until I know they are safe. That's why I have to get back to Baron, it's not just because it was my captain's final order.
Theodore looked up into the darkness swirling above them.
I could be mistaken, but I get the sense you're fighting for a similar reason. Right.
The hooded man blinked, taken aback.
An astute observation. But what makes you say that? Because...
Theodore pressed his hand to his chest. A gentle glow began to envelope his body, and he felt a familiar radiance tingling in his limbs.
Last night, in the crystal chamber, told me you had fear in your heart. And why would a man be afraid unless he had something precious that could be lost?
The hooded man pressed his lips together, words failing him. Theodore closed his eyes. Everything around him began to fade to white, and even the hooded man's steady breathing became a hushed echo. This time, Theodore would not allow his overwhelming strength to take over, he had to retain consciousness, and focus that strength into his mind instead. Calling upon every ounce of his spiritual energy, Theodore raised his right hand, stretching it into the sky as he opened his eyes. Hallowed light began to spread throughout the chamber, revealing a mess of twisted limestone pathways beneath their feet that either decomposed into nothingness or continued onward. If Theodore or the hooded man had taken even a few more steps to their left or right, they would have fallen off the path they had landed upon and plunged into the darkness below. Theodore thought he heard voices calling from the north, and pivoted. It was just a glimmer, but in the very far distance, he could see a blue rune engraved in a floating platform that was connected to no pathways, but could be jumped to if timed properly.
Over there!
Theodore cried, pointing toward the rune.
But we need to hurry. I don't know how long I can keep this up. Lead the way.
The man replied, pulling his cloak deeper over his face to shield his eyes from the blinding light. Theodore broke out into a run, dodging missteps and dead ends with much more accuracy than he could have ever hoped for in his normal state. His body anticipated every twist in the path, warning him well before his feet automatically lifted into the air. Behind him, the hooded man kept up easily, practically flying from path to path, his cloak fluttering behind him like a royal banner going into battle. Just as they were nearing the final jump that would take them to the rune, Theodore felt his strength falter, his legs folding into themselves like rubber slabs. Black, pulsating spots began to invade his vision.
No.
Theodore whimpered, stretching his hand out toward the rune.
Please, just a little more.
But his lungs felt as if they were about to burst, he drew a final haggard breath and began to fall forward, feeling his feet leave the pathway.
Easy there.
The hooded man grunted, diving down to scoop Theodore into his arms before propelling himself into the air, vaulting over the final chasm and nimbly landing on the final platform. The rune flashed brilliantly as the darkness fell around them once more.
Gah!
The hooded man landed roughly on the flats of his feet on another stone floor, his knees buckling as he tried to retain his balance and not drop Theodore in the process. Megan and Angela were standing before him, their jaws on the floor and their eyes wide with shock.
What?
Megan gasped.
How did you?
Angela blinked.
Never mind that.
The hooded man groaned, finally having to give in to his body's demands to rest and setting Theodore down on the ground. He collapsed next to him, pressing his palms into his knees as he gasped for air, his stamina thoroughly drained.
Does one of you two know a raise spell?
Of course, Megan huffed, quickly regaining her composure. She cast the spell, and Theodore awoke, his eyes fluttering as pushed himself up from the floor.
Did we make it to Baron? You did great,
the hooded man said, and Theodore beamed when he saw Megan and Anja.
Thank you. If you hadn't have called out to us, we might not have known where we were. It would seem you can take care of yourself just fine,
Anja raised her eyebrows.
Perhaps Lady Porum sent us for nothing. No, no.
Theodore protested.
Please. Come with us a little further, would you? I'm not sure what we'll find out there.
Anja and Megan looked at each other, and shrugged.
It would be remiss of us if we weren't to report Baron's condition back to Lady Porum,
Megan said softly.
Lead the way, Theodore,
Anja said.
This is your hometown, right? Right.
Theodore eyed the exit to the Devil's Road warily. What was he going to find on the other side? He could hear the hooded man standing back up behind him, declining Megan's offer for a healing spell. Theodore grasped the handle of the door, which he realized was exactly like the door back in Mysidia. The little room they were crowded in was even set up the same way, with the same stark shades hiding two small windows. Unlatching it and pushing it open, he cringed inwardly, preparing for the worst, fire crawling up the buildings in the village, monsters prowling the streets, and terrified screams from scared villagers. But when the door swung open, all Theodore was greeted with was a dark gray sky that was threatening to explode with rain at any moment, and a few village children who were scrambling to get home before the storm arrived, their cloaks pulled up over their heads. He realized he was in the northwestern side of town, staring at the back of the general store and only a few blocks away from his grandmother's house. A warm burst of wind hit his face, the humidity thick enough that he could already feel beads of sweat dripping from his scalp. The trees scattered throughout the village swayed threateningly, some of the branches whipping horizontally when they were struck by a particularly violent gust.
Well, I guess we know my city and Baron definitely don't share the same weather,
Anja said dryly.
But on the upside, I don't see anything unusual. It looks like everyone is just taking shelter from the storm. Me neither.
Theodore frowned.
But the monsters were heading in this direction. And we definitely saw smoke. It had looked like it was coming from the castle's keep.
He pushed past the mages and stepped outside, his scarf instantly thrashing in the wind as he narrowed his eyes and tried to peer at the castle. He couldn't see much of it, only the very tallest towers, including the one he normally slept in, but everything appeared to be perfectly normal.
The monsters would have reached Baron by now? Right? They were flying faster than the Red Wings, after all. We had best check in at the castle,
the hooded man said.
They have no way of knowing what happened to the Red Wings, right? Or surely a search party would have been sent by now. Right?
Theodore gulped.
I need to tell the king what happened.
He couldn't understand why his stomach felt as if it had been replaced by a sinkhole.
Let's hurry, before we get caught in the storm,
Megan sniffed.
These cloaks aren't waterproof, you know.
She pulled her hood up over her hair, pouting. Theodore followed suit, grabbing his scarf that was fluttering in the wind and tying it into a makeshift cowl. He didn't care so much about the rain, but was a little worried that he would be recognized, even though the village streets were quickly emptying. He hadn't quite thought through what it would mean if the party learned he was the Prince of Baron, but it was something he wanted to have control over revealing, if at all possible. It felt a little less dishonest that way. They quickly wove through the village streets, Theodore taking his old route as if he were coming home from school, which meant as little potential for interactions with others as possible. The closer they got to the castle, the more he was amazed that nothing seemed to be amiss. There were no signs of any damage to the exterior buildings, and even the lawns leading up to the drawbridge were perfectly manicured as usual, no torn patches of grass from battling, or signs of discharged arrows or damage from any magic. They crossed the lowered drawbridge over the moat that surrounded the castle entrance, and Theodore saw that there were 2 guards, dragoons, it looked like, positioned at the gate that would take you to the Great Hall. He secretly hoped that they would step aside per usual, they tended to save their greetings for only the king and queen anyway, but Theodore could feel the anxiety creep into his throat as he got to only a few paces away, and they still hadn't moved an inch. Finally, he had to force himself to stop lest he run into them, and looked up, his cheeks flushing. "Please don't use my title. Please don't use my title."
Excuse me.
His voice came out as a mere squeak from nerves. But neither of the guards looked at Theodore, they were staring ahead wordlessly, like they hadn't heard a word he said. Theodore cleared his throat, and tugged down on his scarf a little to reveal more of his face.
"We need to get through."
Finally, a guard turned to him, his lips barely moving as he muttered his reply.
"No one may pass. Orders from the king." "What?"
Theodore blinked. For good measure, he tugged down his scarf the rest of the way. His disguise couldn't have been that good.
"It's me. Theodore. No one may pass. Orders from the king."
The other soldier droned, identical to the first. Theodore clenched his jaw, giving a defiant wave of his hand.
"Can't you see who I am?"
He was so confused that he didn't care how arrogant and snobby he sounded. Megan and Anja looked at each other, and the hooded man cleared his throat.
"Let's go, Theodore."
Theodore whirled around, resisting the childish urge to stomp his foot.
"Hey. We're wasting our time here,"
the man said calmly, his eyes flicking up at the soldiers before returning to Theodore's. There was a powerful rumble of thunder from above, and a streak of white lightning ripped across the sky. He turned and began to walk away. Theodore glanced back at the guards one last time before hesitantly following him, and Megan and Anja trailed behind dutifully. When they had crossed back over the drawbridge and were out of earshot, Theodore gave in to panic.
"Those guards were strange. So pale, and what's more, they didn't even recognize me."
The hooded man paused, muttering under his breath.
"Just like before."
"Hey." Theodore blinked, and the man shook his head.
We'll have to sneak in, I suppose. We can do so through the waterway in town, right?
Theodore tilted his head.
I'm impressed you know about that. I thought that was a local secret. A rather embarrassing one, at that,
he sighed.
I never understood why they just didn't seal that up. Seems like a huge security risk. But regardless, it's locked. If it's locked, that means there must be a key,
the hooded man said, as if it were that easy.
There's got to be someone that watches over the waterway to keep the citizenry out, right? Well, yes.
Theodore trailed off.
But we don't really have any guards that are stationed at the waterway, so I can't imagine the military has it. If there was an emergency, there's really only one person close by.
He blinked.
That must be it. Sid, Baron's chief engineer. He lives right above the waterway. I bet Sid could help us find a way in. Let's find him then,
the man said, and Theodore nodded eagerly. Of course. How could he forget about Sid? He would know what had happened in the castle, and maybe he could explain what was going on. Perhaps the guards were being ordered to be extra careful because of the monsters? Sid could set them straight, then they wouldn't even have to go through the waterway. The thought of it made Theodore shudder anyway. He had never been, but it sounded beyond creepy. Theodore led the party to Sid's house, which sat on the northwestern side of town, not far from the Devil's Road entryway. He had lived in the same, modest-sized brick house on the highest hill in Baron his entire life. Sid had told Theodore that he was born there, inherited it when his parents had died, and wanted to raise his own family there as well after he had gotten married, and subsequently widowed. After Sid's daughter had gotten married, Theodore barely remembered the wedding, but he had been commissioned to be the ring bearer. Sid even insisted that she move her new husband in. Since Sid spent so much time at the castle, his daughter practically had the house to herself anyway, but Theodore had always been a little jealous that their entire family got to live under one roof. It seemed like it would be so exciting to always have family around. As a child, when Theodore had asked Cecil if Rose's mother could move into the castle with them, he had never seen his father turn so white so quickly. Theodore climbed the steps leading to Sid's yard two at a time, his heart fluttering excitedly. He knocked on the door, and was greeted by Amelia, Sid's only daughter. She was holding a sniveling boy in her arms, and looked like she had been caught in a storm herself. Her red hair was falling out of the braid she normally had thrown over one shoulder, and her clothes were covered in food and some sort of liquid that Theodore could only hope was water.
Theodore!
She gasped. The boy in her arms, Mid, wailed louder, and she hushed him between clenched teeth.
Sorry dear. Mid is terrified of storms, and I just had to pull him out from under the bed. While attempting to make lunch.
She shook her head and took a deep breath.
What can I do for you? Is Sid here?
Theodore asked anxiously. He didn't want to be rude by trying to peer behind Amelia, but as he pushed up on his toes, he realized with disappointment that he could only see her husband, who was trying to supervise something that was burning on the range.
No, I'm afraid not.
Amelia shook her head, and Mid hiccuped.
My grandpa promised me we'd go on an airship voyage when he got home from work.
The child sniffed.
That was forever ago. He hasn't been home.
Theodore frowned.
Not since yesterday morning, no,
Amelia said.
I heard a disturbing rumor that the castle was attacked by monsters. A girlfriend of mine even said she saw smoke. But everything seems fine. It's not unusual for my father to sneak in overnight in the shipyard, but I'm still a little concerned. His Highness would have surely kicked him out and made him come home by now if that were the case. He's been trying very hard to crack down on my father's workhorse tendencies, shall we say.
Sid's son-in-law called out from where he was standing in the kitchen.
I have to say, I'm worried. The man's not exactly young anymore. He'd be livid if he heard me say that, but if you see him, will you tell him to stop pushing himself so hard?
Amelia shook her head.
Also, Mid misses him. Please don't tell him what my husband said. Yes, about that.
Theodore felt his cheeks turn red. He was horrible at lying, but he didn't want Amelia to worry about what was happening at the castle for now. She obviously didn't know about the guards, or else she wouldn't have said that everything seemed fine.
The reason I was looking for Sid is because Captain Biggs wants me to investigate the waterway entrance. Says there might be some monsters that have made a nest there. I figured Sid would be home for lunch by now, so I just came here. Oh, have you joined the Red Wings, dear? That's wonderful.
Amelia smiled, and even Mid clapped his hands, even though he didn't understand what he was acting excited about.
Today happens to be your lucky day, I've actually been holding on to the key for my father.
She reached down in her pocket, fishing out an ancient, iron skeleton key that had a worn-down crest of Baron embedded in the bow, and handing it to Theodore.
You can just give it back to my father when you see him again, okay? Yes ma'am.
Thank you, Theodore bowed.
Well, I'd best go. I want to try to finish before the sky opens up on us. Be careful.
Amelia waved, and mimicked her. She peered over Theodore's shoulder, noticing the shabbily clothed man and two mages standing a few feet behind him.
Who are your friends?
Just some assistants, Theodore laughed nervously, and took a few steps backwards.
Bye. Bye.
Mid exclaimed, and did Theodore a huge favor by reaching out and slamming the door in his face. Theodore groaned and turned away, and the hooded man smirked.
Assistants? You need assistance to exterminate a measly monster nest. It was the best I could come up with under the circumstances,
Theodore snapped.
Now, can we get this over with? That's what we should be asking,
Megan pouted.
A waterway is basically a sewer, right? Yes,
Anja grinned wickedly.
So watch your step.
Theodore had not entirely made up the concept of monsters living in the dank, flooded caverns. His father had told him about his own time spent in the waterway as a young man. He and Kane had done training as cadets there, although it was frowned upon nowadays due to fears of a cave-in. Probably much to Captain Big's disappointment, Theodore thought. May his soul rest in peace, but the man was still a sadist. I don't think he would have denied it, either. Although they had descended a couple stories underground, Theodore could still hear the distant rumble of the thunder on the surface, and soon the sound of furious rain came hammering down on the cavern ceilings, filling the chambers with a constant roaring echo that made it difficult to hear even their own footsteps. Anja made quick work of the monsters that were not scared into hiding by the rain with her black magic. Theodore was both impressed and frightened by how gleefully and efficiently she fried and froze every creature that had the audacity to cross their path. Remembering some hard-learned lessons in his own magic classes where the white mage group he was in would practice their defense spells against novice black mages, he did his best to simply stay out of her way. It was difficult for him to admit, but it was nice to have a short break from having to worry about dueling monsters. He was still exhausted from the Devil's Road and from the effort of summoning his unknown power once again, and the relative silence in between the four of them as they stumbled through the tunnels gave him some much-needed time to mull over their current situation. It has been a full day since the monsters attacked the Red Wings, and since we saw the smoke coming from Baron, Theodore mused. Amelia made it seem like the village was unharmed, but no one seems to know what happened at the castle. Has no one that was there the morning of the attack come home? There's no evidence that there was a fight, but the guards won't let anyone in. Why would Sid still be there? Is he helping my father with something? Theodore glanced over at the hooded man. He had kept his eyes straight ahead nearly the entire time, his hand resting over the hilt of his blade, hidden underneath his cloak. Theodore was beyond grateful that the man had put his own urgent business and Baron aside, whatever it was, to help him, but he found himself becoming more and more curious about what exactly his companion was trying to achieve. He seemed a little anxious to get into the castle. Maybe his business is actually there, Theodore thought. I can't shake the feeling that he is looking for someone. Does he have family in Baron, too? Theodore averted his eyes when the hooded man paused at a ledge, holding out his arm. Would he actually tell me if I just came out and asked? Probably not. But it's not like I've been entirely truthful with him, either. What am I going to do when I find Father? I'll have to reveal my true title by that point if the hooded man is still with me.
This is where our path ends, the hooded man said, and Theodore, Megan and Anja peered ahead. Indeed, they had run out of solid ground to walk upon. The rest of the tunnel was flooded in brackish-smelling, begrimed water. Anja flicked her wrist back without even a glance behind her, sending a thundara strike down upon the head of an aqua worm that had started to slither up behind them. The bloated, pale blue worm let out a hiss and shrank into a wrinkled tube of flesh before decomposing into dust. Where's the entrance to the castle?
Megan asked, and the hooded man let out a low chuckle.
Just beyond this tunnel, I'm sure,
he pointed ahead, where a distant slope was drenched in shadow.
See how the rocks start to elevate? It probably leads to the surface. But for now, we're going to have to swim for it. No way,
Megan blanched.
What if something in the water tries to get us? Theodore and I will take point with our blades,
the hooded man offered, and Theodore swallowed some bile that had crept up from his stomach. Just the smell of the water made him think there were more dead creatures under there than alive, which wasn't as comforting as one would think.
No more magic, then,
Anja said disappointedly.
Can't risk the water conducting any of my spells. What? What about reflect?
Theodore squeaked.
Can't you cast that on us and then we'd be protected from any friendly fire? I don't know such an advanced spell yet,
Megan pouted.
What about you, Theodore? No.
Theodore lowered his head. Damn. If Mother or Porum were here.
You know. With the rate this rain is coming down, the waterway may flood even more if you don't hurry up,
the hooded man warned.
Best to just jump in and get it over with.
As if to lead by example, he took a leap into the water, and turned around, raising his arms. See? Theodore closed his eyes, forcing himself to jump before he could convince himself that running all the way back to the surface and begging the guard for entry to the castle was a better idea. He gagged as the cold water splashed up into his face, sputtering and trying to spit it out before it could hit his tongue. He was relieved to find that he was at least tall enough that his feet hit the hard floor beneath and that if he stood on his tiptoes, he could easily keep at a few inches between his face and the water. The mages jumped in after him, Megan grumbling under her breath and Anja glaring so intensely that Theodore thought he would turn to stone if he looked her directly in the eyes.
See? Not so bad, right?
The hooded man laughed, and proceeded to wade forward through the water. Being the tallest by far of the four of them, he had no issues gliding through the water, as it only came up to his abdomen.
Come, Theodore. And keep your hand on your blade.
When they had at last made it back to dry land, having only needing to slay a school of splashers to cross safely, the hooded man hauled himself out of the water first, and then extended his hand to Theodore. Theodore sheathed his sword and climbed out next, collapsing on the ground and practically pressing his lips to it out of gratefulness to be back on solid land. Next came Megan and Anja, who both stripped down to their street clothes and wrung out their robes, despondently watching buckets of brown water pour out of them.
Shouldn't be long now,
the hooded man said, and turned to climb the slope before them. Theodore scrambled after him, and the mages trailed behind. They entered what appeared to have once been an underground bunker, several chambers dug out with long extinguished torches still stuck into rusted sconces. The palest sliver of light was pouring down from above, giving them just enough light to find the half-rotten rope ladder that was dangling against the most northern wall. Theodore ran over to it, running his fingers over the rope and flinching when a petrified fiber broke off in his skin.
This looks like it has seen better days.
He brought his finger to his mouth, trying to suck out the splinter, and turning his head to spit when he had succeeded, the metallic taste of his blood staining the tip of his tongue.
Do you think it will hold our weight? I can cast float to make us lighter,
Megan offered.
It's not fail-proof, but it will put less stress on the ladder. Good idea,
Anja nodded.
Let's do it.
Megan closed her eyes, chanting under her breath, and the chamber bloomed in a gentle white light. Translucent angel wings briefly appeared above everyone's shoulder blades before fading away, and Theodore felt his feet lift from the ground. He gingerly reached for the rope ladder, and found that he didn't need to secure his feet on the rungs to pull himself up, the weight from his legs had been negated thanks to the spell. Theodore made his way to the surface, delightedly taking a deep breath of the fresh air even as a curtain of rain smacked him in the face upon his arrival. Climbing over the small retaining wall that had been built to protect the ladder, he splashed into the castle moat, resisting the urge to belt out a victory tune. Finally, they had made it. The sky had gotten even darker while they had been underground, the clouds so thick and black that it gave the impression night had fallen even though it was only the middle of the day. The shrieking wind that whipped the rain about warbled sinisterly as it passed through the towers looming above. After the others had joined Theodore, Megan cast Dispel, relieving the group of their floating abilities so that they could safely trek through the knee-high water of the moat. Theodore led them around the corner to the southwestern side of the castle, and was relieved to see that gated entryway that could accommodate a fully grown man, if one crawled, was currently being left unsecured. He took the key out once more from where he had stashed it inside his breastplate, and pushed it inside the ancient lock. With an audible click, the gate flew open, granting them unfettered access to Baron Castle. Theodore could feel the shaking anxiety that had started to become second nature to him returning to his limbs as he crawled through the opening, half expecting a soldier to appear above him and bring his sword down upon Theodore's neck before he could flee. But instead, the castle was eerily quiet. As Theodore rose to his feet and looked around, he realized that there wasn't a soul to be found. The ancient waterway passage had deposited them in the western wing of the castle, which had always bustled with activity. It was where all of the soldiers were quartered, along with the royal family, and other nobility that kept rooms in the castle for one reason or another. Even in a storm as fierce as this one, at a minimum a few guards would still be stationed outside, but every post had been abandoned. Another powerful gale of wind and ice-cold rain crashed into Theodore, causing him to wrap his arms around himself and clench his jaw to stop his teeth from chattering. He nearly jumped out of his skin when he heard the footfalls of the hooded man's waterlogged boots behind him. They were so incredibly loud in the sweeping silence. Something is terribly wrong, Theodore frowned, shaking his head so that his wet hair would fly out of his eyes. Something must have happened to my parents for the castle to be abandoned like this. Maybe they are hiding away from a monster prowling the grounds, scared or hurt. He closed his eyes, the vision from the Devil's Road of his father being swallowed by flame flashing through his mind. He scanned the overlook that sat north of the keep, swearing he could see scorch marks embedded in the stone walls, even through the relentless downpour half blinded him. The wind howled louder, and with it Theodore could hear his father's screams of agony from high above, carried down to him by the breath of the storm. Theodore looked back at the others, who were frowning perplexedly, but didn't seem particularly alarmed by what was occurring. Why weren't they saying anything? Theodore wondered anxiously. Couldn't they hear the screams too? I have to find my family, before it's too late. Not able to think logically any longer, Theodore suddenly broke away from the party, cupping his hands to his mouth and screaming out into the fierce winds as he ran deeper into the castle.
Father! Mother!
The hooded man clenched his jaw, trying to call Theodore back to him. They were going to quickly attract some unwanted attention if this kept up. What in the world was Theodore doing, shouting for his parents here? Theodore let out a pathetic wail and took in a long, deep breath, nearly choking on the rain as he tried again, his next scream powerful enough to wake the dead.
Father! Mother!
The hooded man approached him from behind cautiously. The boy looked as if he was about to fall away into a dead faint, his face was drained of blood and his lips were turning blue from the chill of the storm. But it was the wild panic etched in Theodore's eyes that gave him pause from coming any closer. Something fearful had ignited inside of the boy, illuminating his gaze so powerfully that the hooded man felt like he was staring into the depths of the crystals themselves. Theodore looked away, staring back up toward the overlook, although what he was looking for, the man had no idea. He felt his voice start to shake as an inkling of a revelation began to take root. Hallowed light, same as the Holy Paladin. Not realistic dreams, but deadly premonitions. And eyes the same color as our blue planet. He had to know for sure if his instincts were correct. The time for coy guessing games had passed. In a gentle but pressing tone, he called out to the boy once more.
Theodore! Your parents are in the castle.
Visibly shaking with his arms hanging at his sides and still refusing to turn around, Theodore nodded his head slowly. His voice came out as a defeated whisper.
Yes.
The hooded man took one hesitant step closer, but Theodore didn't flee deeper into the castle, which he took as a promising sign that the boy was calming down. He had to keep him talking.
What are their names?
Theodore's shoulders heaved as if to suppress a sob, and he turned to face the hooded man, trails of rain dripping down his flattened hair and cheeks.
My father's name is Cecil Harvey, and my mother is Rosa Joanna Farrell.
He looked down at his feet, watching as the flurry of raindrops created ripples in the puddles that had started to pool around his boots.
My full name is Prince Theodore Harvey, of Baron.
End of chapter.